LNG TV, the official media partner for the World LNG Summit Awards 2021.
Well, it is coffee break time here at the World LNG Summit, so I'm delighted to say, stepping away from his busy schedule, Jason Feer from Poten and Partners joins me here on LNG TV. Now, Jason, you're Head of Business Intelligence. What exactly is your role with Poten and Partners?
Well, we look at all of our multi-client products. So we do all the publishing, we do forecasting, we do data products, and most of the market analysis that Poten does. So that's the role that we fill. So
starting with some market analysis, how do you how do you analyze 2021, and has anything surprised you with the LNG market?
Well, I think the surprising thing is how quickly things have flipped. So, last summer, so 14, 15 months ago, you had sort of record low prices, $1 or $2 per million BTUs. 70% of the US LNG market was sort of offline because of cancellations, and now we're sort of seeing record LNG prices sort of 14, 15 months later. So I think that sort of suddenness, that sort of abrupt shift in the market is quite striking.
Is that a good thing that the market has been able to do that?
Well, I think we're actually starting to see some demand destruction. So you are seeing some countries that would have been, I think, taking more, places like India, Bangladesh, maybe, sort of stepping back from some of the buying that they've done. And I think the sort of volatility that we've seen in the market is making it difficult for companies to manage risk. So I think that's also causing companies to kind of question how reliable, how much they can rely on LNG.
Looking ahead now to 2022, some predictions for both Europe and Asia. Europe, the high prices, particularly during 2021, they seem to be there to stay for a little bit longer. What do you expect, or how do you see those prices changing or fluctuating in 2022?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, we expect to see more of the same, because one of the big causes of the high prices we've seen was finishing last winter with very low inventories. We had sort of a normal winter, so we had a very strong draw out of inventories. And the high prices, and particularly the high prices in Asia, drew most of the volume away from Europe. So they weren't able to refill inventories this year. So I think what we're going to see is basically more of the same. We're going to finish this winter in February, March, with very low inventories. It's looking like Asia is going to be the high-priced market and is going to pull most of the supply east. So I think we're looking at sort of more of the same, most likely in 22.
Because Asia, they've signed a number of SPAs in Q4 of 2021. Therefore, you're expecting that growth to continue with them?
I think it's partly that growth. I think it's also just Europe has other alternatives. So Europe, of course, one of the reasons that Europe is so high priced is Russia has been unwilling to sort of supply more gas. Europe has alternatives. Can take pipeline gas from Algeria, can take LNG from the United States, and through Russia and domestic North Sea gas. Asia doesn't have that option in most of the countries. So if they need more gas, it's got to be LNG. So they're typically willing to pay higher prices than the Europeans have been willing to pay.
Do you see more SPAs, more FIDs being signed next year?
I think we do. We expect to see a couple of more. We expect at least one or two in the US. I think those will be the big ones that we'll see this coming year.
As 2021 comes to an end and the fallout from COP26, do you expect, with that in mind, policy or prices to be the biggest impact on the market next year?
I mean, I think policy will sort of take longer to be felt. So I think carbon costs are going to start to be felt increasingly over the next 10 years. I don't think that'll make a big difference next year, although European carbon prices do affect the behavior of companies. So I think we'll see some of that happening. I think in the long run, though, I think the carbon policies, carbon taxes, the cost of mitigating climate change is going to have a bigger impact on LNG demand and hydrocarbon demand in general.
And as you've been wandering around World LNG Summit, what's been the big talking points of the week?
I think it's long-term demand is really what the big conversation is. I think it's pretty clear that the supply is coming. You have national oil companies, people like Qatar, some of the Russian companies building capacity, whether they pre-sell it or not. So I think the question is long-term demand. To what extent will decarbonization affect demand 5 years from now? Probably not so much. 10, 20 years, I think it could have a big impact.
And what are the challenges that the industry do you think should be addressing with that in mind?
Well, I think reducing your carbon footprint, I think being able to identify exactly what the carbon footprint is, I think being able to offset some carbon emissions, and then I think lastly really being able to reduce methane emissions, which is a sort of shorter term impact, but has a sort of bigger impact on climate change.
And with the businesses that you're working and the people that you're chatting to, are they, is that happening? Are they quite open to it, or is it there are sticking points there?
I think more and more companies in the LNG business and in oil and gas in general are taking it seriously. You can see some pretty big investments being made to carbon capture. I think a lot of companies are taking, in terms of how they account for their emissions, much more seriously. I think part of that's driven by buyers sort of insisting that they understand what the carbon footprint of the LNG they're buying is. So I think that's also being driven by the consumers as well as the producers.
And that will only increase, you expect?
I think so, yeah.
And 2022, your predictions, both I guess in the industry, but then also within your firm or your personal dealings?
Yeah, I think it'll be a good year. I think it'll be another sort of volatile year. We still don't know what's happening with the latest variant in COVID, but I think we'll see a lot of price volatility. I think that's sort of not a bad thing for a lot of companies like ours that support the industry. So I think more of the same, sort of another complicated, uncertain year.
Complicated within LNG, but let's hope that the rest of the world can sort of get back to some normality.
Absolutely.
We can be sitting here next year when the LNG Summit's in Greece next year. But thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a sort of busy time and you've got to get and see lots of people. So thank you for finding some time to join us here on LNG TV. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure.